Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to another video. In this video, we're going to be looking at how I like to color grade or process the color on my Blackmagic URSA Mini Pro 4.6K G2 footage. And we're going to break down about 7 shots from a recent commercial we shot on this camera. We were also using the Desofilm 20 to 55mm lens. If you want to know more about this camera setup with this lens package, you can check out this video right here. And that explains 10 things that I love about this camera. But here you can see the actual result of some of the shots that we've processed with this camera. So if we jump into DaVinci Resolve right now, in the timeline, as I said, I pulled up 7 shots from this recent commercial. It's for a bee company here in New Zealand, and they produce Manuka honey. And you can see here, we'll just play through some of these raw shots. We've got 7 outdoor shots. It's all natural light. There's no additional reflectors or additional lights brought in to frame any of these shots. So it's a really good test of the dynamic range of the URSA. The images coming out of it are really lovely. So let's jump over to the color page. Now there are 2 ways that we can approach this. The first one, we can bring up the preferences menu and then go to our color management tab and choose DaVinci YRGB color manage, or we could also use a form of ASUS color management. In this case, we'll just use color managed and hit save. And you can see what that has done is convert all of this raw footage, which is shot in Blackmagic RAW 12:1 compression in the film gamma, and converted it into a Rec 709 color space. And that's what this setting underneath DaVinci YRGB color managed is. It's color processing into an SDR, standard dynamic range space within Rec 709. So that's automatically done a color space transform for us. If your footage doesn't change automatically, you'll need to go back to the edit tab or the media pool and go to all of your original clips, select them all and just right click and choose input color space, and make sure that the input color space is matching the film gamma that you've shot it in. So in this case, Blackmagic Design Film Gen 5. Ignore that shot, that was just a drone shot, but this is the URSA shot that film gamma has been applied to with the managed color space. So back in the color tab, now this is all converted, we can actually just start tweaking it. Other people like to take the color science off, go back to a standard DaVinci YRGB color space, back to our original footage and manually put in a color space transform. So we can see the color space transform come up under the open effects. You can simply just drag that into a node and then manually put all the input color space parameters in for our particular camera. So in this case, we're going Blackmagic Design, Wide Gamma Gen 4 and 5. Input gamma is 4.6K film, and then output color space will be Rec 709, and then output gamma, Rec 709, gamma 2.4. So that transform is now a manual transform that is sitting in a node. I'll just rename this color space transform. Doing it this way, you do have a little bit more control and finesse over the node structure and the image at the end of the day. So it is a method that I like to use a lot. Now I also like to grade underneath the color space transform within a log color space. A lot of these primary wheels were designed originally and the log wheels to work with log footage. And so I like to create nodes underneath this color space transform. And we're going to start building our node tree to grade these 7 URSA clips today. What I'm going to do is just hit a noise reduction node to begin with, which we won't use, but I'll leave it there. We're going to add in a balance node, which is just finessing the contrast of the clip. And then the next node will be a white balance adjustment. So I'm going to hit my balance node, and remember the CST is still on, and we're going to start viewing everything through that. Over my balance adjustment, I'm going to add an additional contrast curve to it just by using the contrast slider here as well as the pivot. And then I'm also going to be using my offset wheel in the luminance range and just lifting up my images a touch. If I reset that, what you could see before is that my shadows are quite clipped down the bottom, and I just want to give a little bit more lift to the footage and just get those shadows off 0. So back in the balance, I can add more contrast and reduce the pivot just to give a bit more depth to the image. Now, if I disable the balance You can see that's just really given it a bit more vibrance. One tip I do have when you're adding contrast to an image, if you're struggling to find a sweet spot for the contrast, what you can do is go ahead and just remove all of the saturation from the image. And what that will do is take away any color bias. So now on the black and white image, I can add contrast and just worry about the contrast of my image. And then when I reset the saturation, you'll find a lot of the time that you're getting a really rich, vibrant contrast adjustment within the balance. But what I'm going to do quickly is just copy that node tree over to all the clips. So now all these clips have that adjustment. They've got the color space transform and the ability for me now to adjust the balance on each clip. So we'll go ahead and select node 2, and I'm just going to do the exact same thing, remove my saturation and reduce the offset down and increase the contrast and pivot. And removing that saturation has given us that lift in contrast. I'm just going to quickly move through these next few clips and do the exact same thing. So reduce saturation and just dial in that contrast. If you don't want to be reducing saturation all the time, you can go up to the timeline and add a node in here with no saturation. And that is just going to reduce the saturation across the entire timeline. So every time I'm viewing a clip now, I'm not having to individually reduce sat. So I'm looking at the balance here. It is looking a little bit hot in the shadows. So I've just reduced the contrast a touch. Right, next clip. Again, same thing. Just going to increase the contrast on this balance node. I'll loop that and just play it back. And choose this frame just to dial in that contrast. One thing you will notice is as I'm creating my contrast in the balance node here, even if I crank the contrast as hard as I can, you're not actually ever going to clip the blacks down the bottom. It's just going to naturally roll off into 0 and 1023. And so it's quite a natural way to add contrast without worrying about completely clipping the shadows. It's going to roll all that shadow nicely into each other. You can see there, that's a massive jump in terms of that balance for the contrast of this clip. Okay, moving on to the next clip. I'm not worried about shot matching at this stage. I'm just getting my base correction in. And then what I can do is select all these clips and just bring up the split screen, bring up my selected clips. So if I go full screen now, you can see all of those adjustments together and just where the contrast is sitting overall. So I'm thinking this is a little bit light up the top. I'm going to have to do some highlight work on this shot and this shot just to bring that sky down because it's quite bright here and this is obviously in the shade. So let's go to the timeline and take off that saturation node and have a look at the same program again. And you can see how rich and vibrant that is just from adding a little bit of contrast. That's original. This is with a bit of contrast and the color space transform. So I'm already seeing a few things that I can tweak, and I'm going to do that with the Neighbor Clips Splitscreen. What this is if you click this button up here, you can drop down and choose all these different types of split screens. Neighbor Clips essentially shows you the frame that you're working on with the white box, 2 frames previous and 1 frame in front. You can just tweak that contrast again by looking at the split screen view, so I can compare the shots across the board and make sure that it's nice and consistent. The shot here I'm feeling is a little dense. We're in the balance node again, and I'm just tweaking the pivot of the contrast, because what I was noticing is that the B's here were a little bit too dark. Yeah, I'm just going to reduce that contrast there. The shot here has a lot of hot highlights. So in the balance node, I'm actually going to reduce the highlights as well. And you can see that displayed here, this highlight slider. So I'm just reducing the highlights. This is before and this is after. Just rolling those highlights off a bit. As I play through, it's a bit more balanced. Great. So I would say that is what I would call a base adjustment in terms of balance. across the board, it's looking really good. There's definitely white balance adjustments I need to do, and definitely finessing of all the highlights and additional color grading. But you can see that really quickly we've been able to convert it into a Rec 709 color space because it was shot well, and now we've ended up with this. I would be more than happy to send this off to a client if it was one of the first drafts. So if the client is just getting a draft of the story, this type of color grade is great because it's vibrant and rich, and it gives them, I guess, the fullness of what the shot is showing them. But from here, we can obviously finesse and refine our color grade. The next thing that I will do is take off the split screen, and now I'm just going to start finessing the white balance of each shot. You'll also notice that sometimes there's a lag in the thumbnail here, so you can go ahead and right click and just update all thumbnails. Then it'll get rid of that black and white preview. So I'm going to start working through finessing these shots a bit more. I'm going to reduce highlights on this clip here. This clip here to me needs a white balance adjustment. So I'm going to use my printer lights and just take out a little bit of yellow and a touch of red. The best view for this is to choose your waveform because you can really see where the highlights and shadows are resolving, and the color bias in here, such as blue, you can actually just remove blue or add blue and it will resolve to white. So this is before the white balance adjustment and after. And just in my gamma, I'm just going to pull a touch of purple out of the skin tone. Now, I haven't actually added any additional saturation to this. The saturation is just coming from the color space transform and then my balance. So color space transform and the balance, by adding contrast, is giving the appearance of saturation. So I can either reduce the contrast a touch or just dial back that saturation depending on how it's feeling. Now, what I'm going to do is take out this balance and create a parallel node. And I'm just going to treat my highlights with this node. So I'm going to call it highlights minus. What I can do is bring up the qualifier and just create a Luma key. So if I hit Shift H, you can see what the Luma key is actually adjusting. If I pull it all the way up, you can see that it is just going to be selecting those highlight areas. I want a little bit of the sky, but mainly the jackets. Now, once I've made that selection, I can use my highlight slider, which is down here, and just roll that off. Before and after, before, after. It's just controlling those highlights a little bit. You can also do this to this clip here. Create a Luma key just to select the suit and the sky, and to soften that a little bit so it's a nice roll off. And then we're going to reduce the highlights. Not too much though, because I definitely still want it to look natural. And now in combination with that, I can just tweak my contrast to make sure that the image is sitting in the right spot. Over here, white balance, just going to reduce the yellows using my offset. Often you'll think that the contrast is in a good space, but as you're watching back, the discrepancy between the frames become a little bit more obvious, and particularly the white balance as well. All right, this clip is just looking a little contrasty. And then our final clip, yeah, it's in a good space. All right, so that's a lot of the groundwork done. Let's preview this full screen and just watch it through and see where we feel it's sitting. So to me, it's feeling pretty good. This shot here was a touch green. So I'm just going to use my offset wheel and pull this green out just by adding a little bit of magenta and a bit more warmth. And then this shot here was looking quite red after previewing it with the rest. So you can see that white balance there has made a really big difference. Now that we have a strong baseline for our base correction and it's looking really rich and vibrant, what we can do is move it now into more of a creative grading. And from here, it really is just preference. It's what do you want it to look like and finessing the look, I guess, to serve the story. So what I'm going to do is actually do my grading entirely on the timeline clip. Generally, I would put it in the clip, but because of the tutorial, I'm just going to grade in timeline, and what that will do is affect all the clips. So I'm going to choose my hero clip, and the first thing I'm going to do is just give the colors a bit more density. So I can do that with the hue versus, and under here, I can go ahead and choose hue versus luminance and just reduce the luminance of the colors. What you can see is it's just giving some density to the color. It's also brought out that real golden warmth in the honey. I'm also in the hue versus, I'm just going to play with the saturation of the different hues. And I think I'm just going to reduce the saturation of my greens and just roll that off. And I'm going to pick out these teals and I'm just going to add some luminance just to the teals. And also to the pinks. So essentially I'm restoring the original luminance of these colors. So you can see the density is affecting the green, the yellow, but it's not affecting all my primary colors that I really want to pay attention to. And the trick with these hue versus curves is just to try and make the roll off as soft as possible. Now in my hue versus hue, I just want to move the sky in a slightly more teal direction, not too much. You can see if I push it all the way, you can see how that adjusts the hue, but I'm just going to nudge it up ever so slightly just to move that sky into more of a teal space. So along with this hue versus, I'm going to create a parallel node and start playing with my lift, gamma, and gain. So now with my lift, gamma, and gain, I'm going to just be dialing in my look a little bit with the color adjustments of lift, gamma, and gain. So with my gain wheel, I'm going to be bringing some warmth into the highlights. And then with my lift, I'm just going to be pulling back to compensate for those shadows. And then in the gamma, I might pull just some blues to compensate again for those highlights. We can really push the warmth into the highlights as long as we're compensating for it in the midtones. So if you pay attention here, you can see what we've done with the lift, gamma, and gain adjustments. The gamma has kept, I guess, the guts of the image, all of the mid-tone detail to be quite neutral, but you can see the gain here has really affected the highlights and given the image a real nice warmth. That shot there before and after, and with this entire adjustment before and after. So back in the hue versus, what I'm noticing now is that teal in the straps isn't actually super nice. So I'm just going to pull back a touch more. So it's still affecting the color enough, but it's still quite natural. Great. So I could go ahead and create vignettes and do a bunch more finessing. But for the sake of this video, I'm just going to do a last final touch and add some film grain so I can use my open effects. And I've actually got a plugin installed called FilmConvert. And this plugin is going to give that final real filmic look to this image. Now, FilmConvert's a really powerful plugin. You can actually use it to grade right from raw footage because you've got all of your camera profile defaults. I like to use the default standard YRGB profile so that I can use it in addition downstream from my color space transform. What I'm going to do for this is just bring in the Luma to about 50% and the chroma. I'm just going to touch it up to about 20. But the main thing that I'm focusing on is the strength of the grain here. And then here in the grain curve, you can see that we can actually take all of the grain out of the shadows, and the midtones and the highlights will retain a lot more of that grain from the film. And that's a really natural way of adding grain, because if you just add grain across your image throughout the shadows all the way to the highlights, then it's just not going to look natural and organic. A lot of film stocks that you see don't actually retain the grain in the shadows, and that's what this curve is just accentuating here, I guess. So if we take off all of the final color grade adjustments and just have a look at this in split screen, selected clips, and I'll just select all of these adjustments. You can see here, this is before, just with the balance and primary adjustments, and this is after the color grade. It's a real subtle, natural color grade, but I think it suits this program really nice. It's still rich and vibrant and looks quite natural, but it's given it a real cinematic, filmic edge. Okay, so there you have it. That is how I would tend to approach URSA Mini Pro 4.6K G2 footage shot on Blackmagic RAW 12:1 compression. As I say, there are so many different ways to color grade, but this particular way is just a quick way to get all of our raw footage out of that raw state into a Rec 709 space and just give a really subtle cinematic look to it once we've done our base correction. And very quickly we can get it into a spot where we're pretty happy to send it off to the client, particularly for the first round of revisions. Obviously, if I had all day, I would dive real deep into each shot and finesse it and just make sure everything is consistent between the shots. But hopefully, as you can see, you can get 99% of the way there relatively quickly within the first half an hour of grading your program. If you have any questions about this, please leave a comment in the comment box below. I'd love it if you could like and subscribe to this channel for more awesome videos like this. For now, peace out, and we'll see you in the next one.